left me on purpose. That's the part I need you to understand before anything else, because for years I tried to soften it in my own head. I told myself she panicked. I told myself the gate agent rushed her. I told myself 100 different stories where my mother wasn't the kind of woman who could board a plane in a foreign country and leave her 15-year-old daughter behind. But none of those stories were true. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had her passport in her hand and my passport in her purse. And she walked down that jet bridge without once looking back. I'm 31 now. I live in a small apartment in Portland, with 2 cats and a job I built from nothing. Most days I'm fine, but every time I see a mother in an airport, pulling a kid along by the wrist, something in my chest goes tight, and I have to remind myself I'm not standing in Terminal 3 of Hamad International Airport in Doha, Qatar, watching the Boeing 777 roll away from the gate, with my mother and my stepbrother on it. Let me back up. My name is Mira. I grew up in a suburb outside Cincinnati, Ohio, in a brick house with a basketball hoop in the driveway that nobody ever used because my stepbrother said basketball was for losers. My biological father died when I was 4. I don't remember him much, just the smell of pipe tobacco and the way he used to hum while he made pancakes on Sunday mornings. He left behind a small life insurance policy and a daughter who looked exactly like him, which I think was the problem. My mother remarried when I was 7. His name was Doug, and he had a son named Trent, who was 2 years older than me. Doug worked in commercial real estate and made what my mother called real money, which I came to understand meant the kind of money where you don't check the price of things at the grocery store. We moved into a bigger house. I got my own bedroom with a window seat. On paper, my life had improved. In practice, I had become invisible. Trent was the golden child from day one. He had blonde hair and Doug's jawline, and he was the kind of kid who could break a lamp and somehow convince every adult in the room that the lamp had it coming. My mother adored him, not the polite affection of a stepmother trying to do her duty, but a real, hungry kind of love. She braided possibility into him. She'd watch him eat cereal in the morning and her whole face would soften. I'd come downstairs in the same kitchen and she'd ask without looking up if I'd remembered to take out the recycling. I want to be fair. She didn't hit me. She didn't starve me. She fed me and bought me school supplies and showed up to parent-teacher conferences where she'd shake the teacher's hand and say things like, "Mira's always been our quiet one." Quiet. That was the word. Like I'd chosen silence the way other kids chose softball or piano. The truth was, I'd learned by age 9 that speaking up in our house was like throwing a rock into a pond. Whatever ripple I made would get blamed on me later. Trent figured out early that he could do almost anything to me, and our mother would side with him. He'd take my homework and burn the corners with a lighter. And when I told her, she'd say I shouldn't leave my things lying around. He'd lock me in the basement laundry room and let me cry for an hour before opening the door. And when I told her, she'd say boys play rough and I needed thicker skin. By the time I was 12, I'd stopped telling her anything. What I did instead was study. I poured every ounce of myself into school. I learned French. I joined the debate team. I read books about other countries the way some kids read fantasy novels, because the idea of a place where nobody knew me felt like the closest thing to heaven I could imagine. I had a teacher in 8th grade, Mrs. Judry Halloway, who pulled me aside after a class presentation and said, "You have a real mind, Mira. Don't let anyone make you forget that." I went home and wrote her words down in a notebook I kept under my mattress. I read them every night for a year. When I was 15, Doug announced we were taking a family trip to the Maldives. He'd closed a big deal and wanted to celebrate. And apparently the Maldives was where you went when you wanted to feel like you'd made it. My mother was beside herself. She bought new luggage. She bought Trent a new GoPro. She bought me a swimsuit 2 sizes too big and told me it would be fine, I could grow into it. The flight plan had us connecting in Doha. A long layover, almost 6 hours, then on to Malé. I'd never been outside the country. I'd never been on a plane bigger than the little regional jets that flew out of Cincinnati. I sat by the window on the leg from JFK to Doha, and when we crossed over the Atlantic at night, I could see the lights of ships below us like tiny stars on the water, and I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, things could be different now. Maybe a trip like this could change something. We landed in Doha around 4 in the morning local time. The airport was enormous, all gleaming floors and that giant yellow teddy bear sculpture in the center that I'd seen in pictures online. My mother was tired and cranky. Doug went off to find a business lounge. Trent disappeared to wander the duty-free shops with his GoPro, filming everything like he was already a YouTuber. I sat at a cafe near our gate and ordered a hot chocolate with the small allowance Doug had given me. I had my backpack with me, the same green canvas backpack I'd carried since 7th grade. Inside it was my passport, my boarding pass for the next flight, $200 in 20s that I'd saved from babysitting, my phone, my notebook, and a paperback copy of The House on Mango Street that I'd brought because it always made me feel less alone. Around an hour before our next flight, Trent showed up at my table. He sat down across from me, slid my hot chocolate aside, and gave me the look he always gave me when he was about to enjoy himself. He said, "Mom needs your backpack." I asked why. He said the passports were in there, and she wanted to consolidate everything before the flight. He held out his hand. Now, here is the part I've replayed 1,000 times. I knew Trent was a liar. I'd known since I was 8 years old, but my passport was in my backpack, and the passports being together made a kind of logistical sense, and at 15, you still want to believe your family wouldn't do something monstrous to you in an airport halfway across the world. So I handed him the backpack. I handed him every single thing I needed to exist in that country. He smiled. He walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd, and then I sat there for a long minute feeling something cold settle into my stomach. Because the smile had been wrong. The smile had been the smile he used to give me right before he locked the basement door. I got up. I started walking toward our gate. The boarding had already begun. I could see my mother at the front of the line, her boarding pass held out to the agent. Doug was behind her. Trent was behind Doug, and he had my backpack slung over his shoulder along with his own. I called out. My voice didn't carry. The terminal was loud, full of announcements in 3 languages, and I was still 100 feet away. I started to run. My mother handed her boarding pass to the agent. The agent scanned it. She walked through the door onto the jet bridge. I screamed her name then. People turned to look at me. Not her. She didn't turn. Doug went through next. Then Trent, and Trent was the only one who turned. And what I saw on his face I will remember until the day I die. He smiled at me. He gave me a little wave. And then he was gone. I reached the gate maybe 40 seconds later. The agent was already closing the door. I tried to explain. I didn't have my passport. I didn't have my boarding pass. My family was on that plane. The agent was polite, but firm. Without documents, I couldn't board. She suggested I go to the airline's customer service desk. She was already turning to deal with the next passenger. I stood there and watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as the jetway pulled back from the plane. I watched the ground crew wave their orange wands. I watched the 7777 begin to taxi. I was 15 years old in a country where I didn't speak the language, with no passport, no money, no phone, because the phone had been in the backpack, and no boarding pass. My family was inside that airplane, and they were leaving me there on purpose. I want to tell you that I cried. I didn't. I think shock works like a kind of anesthesia. I walked over to a row of chairs by the window, and I sat down and I watched the plane line up on the runway and lift into the dark sky. And then I just kept sitting there. I don't know how long I sat. Long enough that the gate filled up with passengers for the next flight, then emptied again. Long enough that the sky outside started to lighten with the desert sunrise. A janitor came by emptying the trash bins. He was an older man, maybe 60, in a blue uniform. He said something to me in Arabic and I shook my head and then he tried English. He asked if I was lost. I told him my family had left me. He looked at me for a long time. Then he sat down 2 seats away from me, set down his cleaning cart and said, "You stay. I find someone." His name, I would later learn, was Mr. Karim Mansour. He was a Lebanese man who had worked at that airport for 19 years. He had 3 grown daughters back in Beirut. He told me later, when we were sitting in the airport police office, that the moment he saw me, he thought of his middle daughter, Layla, and he knew he couldn't walk away. The airport police arrived within 20 minutes. They were professional and gentle in a way I wasn't expecting. A female officer named Officer Hassan took me into a small room with a couch and a vending machine and a poster about lost children on the wall. She got me a bottle of water and a sandwich from a refrigerator I think might have belonged to the staff. She asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I told her about the trip, about the backpack, about Trent saying our mother wanted the passports, about the look he gave me as he boarded. Halfway through, I started shaking, and Officer Hassan put a blanket around my shoulders without making a big deal of it. What I didn't know, and what Mr. Mansour didn't know, and what Officer Hassan didn't know yet, was that as I was sitting in that little room, my stepbrother Trent was sitting in seat 14B of that Boeing 777, texting his friend back in Cincinnati from the in-flight Wi-Fi. He was bragging. I'll come back to that. Officer Hassan made phone calls. She called the U.S. Embassy in Doha. She called Qatar Airways. She called the airport's child protection liaison. Within an hour, I was sitting in front of a woman from the U.S. Embassy named Miss Mills Whitcomb, who had driven over in the early morning to deal with me, and she did not look pleased, but it turned out her displeasure was not directed at me. It was directed at whatever adult had let this happen. She asked me for my mother's name, my stepfather's name, my home address in Cincinnati. She asked me to write down every relative I could think of with contact information. She gave me a temporary phone to use. The first person I called was Mrs. Holloway, my 8th grade English teacher. She was the only adult I trusted. It was 9 at night in Ohio. When she answered and I said, Mrs. Holloway, it's Mira, I need help, she just said, tell me where you are. Like she'd been waiting her whole career for that exact phone call. She got on a plane the next morning. But before she got there, things began to unravel for my family on the other side of the world. Here's what happened on that plane. About 4 hours into the flight to Malé, Trent's friend back in Cincinnati, a kid named Brody, screenshot the texts Trent had been sending him and showed them to his older sister, who was 18 and was honestly a pretty decent human being. The text said things like, lol, we ditched Mira in Qatar, and she's crying in the airport like a baby, and mom didn't even argue, she just walked on the plane. And Doug said it'll teach her a lesson. Brody's sister read them and immediately called her own mother, who immediately called the police. In the meantime, Officer Hassan in Doha had been doing her own work. By the time my mother's plane landed in Malé, Qatari authorities had already contacted Maldivian authorities. The U.S. Embassy in Malé had been alerted, and the Cincinnati Police Department, thanks to Brody's sister, was already aware that an American minor had been abandoned abroad. When my mother and Doug and Trent walked off that plane in Malé, they were met at the gate by Maldivian immigration officers and a representative from the U.S. Embassy. Their resort vacation lasted approximately 14 minutes before it became an interrogation. I learned all of this in pieces over the following days. Sitting on the couch in Officer Hassan's office, then in a small apartment the embassy arranged for me, then on a plane home with Mrs. Holloway sitting beside me holding my hand the whole way. What I want to be clear about is that this wasn't a story where the bad people get a slap on the wrist. I know a lot of these stories end that way, and I know it's frustrating. This one didn't. My mother was arrested at the airport in Malé. So was Doug. Trent, being a minor, was placed into the custody of embassy officials and eventually returned to the States with a juvenile justice escort. My mother and Doug spent 11 days in a Maldivian holding facility before being extradited back to the United States to face federal charges. Abandoning a minor child in a foreign country is not a small thing. There's a federal statute about it. And there are international treaties, and when you combine that with the screenshot evidence from Trent's phone, which made clear this was premeditated and not a misunderstanding, the prosecutors had very little patience. My mother pled guilty to child abandonment and child endangerment. She was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and served 3. Doug, as the stepfather, faced lesser charges but was convicted of being an accomplice and served 18 months. Trent was placed in a juvenile facility for 9 months and was court-ordered into a residential program for adolescents with behavioral issues. He stayed there until he turned 18. I was placed with my paternal aunt, Aunt Theodora, my dead father's sister, who lived in Vermont and whom I had only met twice in my life. She was 63, a retired school teacher, and the kindest person I had ever encountered. She made me waffles on Sunday mornings, the way my father used to. She did not push me to talk about what had happened. She just made space for me to exist. I lived with Aunt Theodora through high school. I went to college on a scholarship. I never could have gotten if I'd stayed in my mother's house, because Aunt Theodora pushed me to apply for things and believed I would get them. I got into the University of Vermont. I studied international relations. I spent a semester abroad in Morocco, which terrified me and healed me at the same time. I learned that an airport could just be an airport, that a country I didn't know could be kind to me, that what had happened to me in Doha was not, as my mother had implied to me my entire childhood, something I brought on myself. Mr. Mansour and I exchanged letters for years. Actual letters on paper. He sent me a Christmas card every December until he passed away in 2019. His daughter Layla wrote to tell me. I flew to Beirut for his funeral. I stood at his grave and I told him, in the worst Arabic he had patiently taught me through years of correspondence, that he had saved my life. Officer Hassan got promoted twice in the years after she helped me. We're still in touch. Her daughter is studying medicine now. Mrs. Halloway retired in 2017. I flew back to Cincinnati for her retirement party and gave a speech I had spent 3 weeks writing. I told a room full of teachers and former students about the woman who got on a plane to come get a girl she hadn't seen in 2 years because that girl called her from an airport in Qatar and she didn't ask a single question before saying yes. Now here is the part people always want to know, because I get the messages and the comments and I understand the curiosity. What happened with my mother? She got out of prison when I was 19. She tried to contact me through an aunt on her side. I didn't respond. She tried again when I was 22 and had just graduated college. I didn't respond. She tried again when I was 26. And this time, the letter came with a photograph of herself sitting in what looked like a small living room somewhere, and she had written on the back, "I would like the chance to apologize." I sat with that letter for almost 3 weeks. I talked to my therapist about it. I talked to Aunt Theodora about it. In the end, I wrote her back. I said I was willing to meet once, in a public place, with no expectations and no follow-up unless I requested it. We met at a coffee shop in Indianapolis. She had aged. She had cancer, I would learn during the conversation, and she had maybe a year left. She told me she was sorry. She told me Doug had pressured her, that Trent had told her I was stealing money from them and lying about it, that she'd convinced herself I was the problem, and a hard lesson would set me straight. She told me she had loved me. She told me she had been a coward. I listened. I didn't cry. When she was done, I said, "Thank you for telling me." And then I said, "I forgive you, but I'm not going to see you again." She died 14 months later. Aunt Theodora went to the funeral on my behalf. I didn't. Trent, last I heard, lives in Arizona. He works at a car dealership. We have no contact, and I want none. Doug remarried someone else after he got out and has, by all accounts, lived an unremarkable life. I want to end this by saying something that I think the 15-year-old version of me sitting in that airport needed to hear. Maybe it's something you need to hear too. There is a particular kind of cruelty that hides inside a family. It looks normal from the outside. It tells you that you are imagining things. It convinces you the problem is you, that you are too sensitive, that you are too quiet, that you should have known better, that you should have been easier to love. It is patient. It is every day. It can go on for years. And then sometimes, in a moment you never could have predicted, in a place you never expected to be, it shows itself. It hands you a backpack, or it walks down a jet bridge, or it smiles at you and gives you a little wave through a window. When that happens, the most important thing you can know is that it was never about you. You did not earn this. You did not cause this. The people who were supposed to love you were broken in ways that have nothing to do with your worth. And the second most important thing you can know is that the world is not only the people who hurt you. There are janitors who will sit down 2 seats away. There are police officers who will put a blanket around your shoulders. There are English teachers who will get on a plane. There are aunts in Vermont who will make you waffles. There are countries you have never seen that will be kind to you if you let them. I am 31 years old. I live in Portland with 2 cats. I run a small nonprofit that helps American minors who get stranded abroad due to family abandonment or trafficking, and we've placed 42 kids back into safe homes in the last 3 years. The non-profit is called the Mansour Foundation. Mr. Kareem Mansour's daughter Layla sits on our board. I am no longer the girl in the airport, but she is still in me, and I owe her this much. I owe her the truth, told plainly, with no apology and no softening. She left me on purpose, and I survived her anyway. I've spent a lot of years trying to understand what really happened in that airport, and the truth that I've landed on isn't satisfying in the way movie endings are. It's quieter than that. It's this. Every cruel thing my mother and Trent did to me had been rehearsed for a decade in our own living room where nobody was watching. The airport wasn't the beginning of something. It was the end of a long, slow practice. They had gotten away with smaller versions of it for so long that a bigger version felt safe to them. That's how cruelty works inside families. It builds up its own confidence in private. What broke them was not luck. It was the steady, ordinary decency of strangers who refused to look away. Mr. Mansour didn't have to sit down 2 seats from me. Officer Hassan didn't have to wrap a blanket around my shoulders. Mrs. Halloway didn't have to get on a plane. Brody's sister, 18 years old and reading her brother's phone, didn't have to pick up that phone and call the police. None of them owed me anything. They acted because they had built themselves over years I never saw into the kind of people who could not stand by. That is what I mean when I talk about character. Character is what's already inside you before the test arrives. I think about my mother sometimes. She wasn't born wanting to leave a child in a foreign airport. Somewhere along the way she made 1,000 smaller choices that hollowed her out. She chose Trent over me when he was 8 and I was 6. She chose Doug's money over my safety when I was 12. She chose her own comfort over the truth so many times that by the time she walked down that jet bridge, walking away from me wasn't a hard decision. It was just the next one. That's the part that should scare all of us. Bad people are rarely made in a single moment. They are made in the small, unwatched ones. If there's anything I want the version of me sitting alone in that terminal to know, it's that surviving a thing like that does not require a special soul. It requires you to keep your eyes open, to accept the help that comes, to let kind people be kind, and then later, when you're stronger, to become one of them. That's the only justice that lasts. Prison sentences end. Apologies fade. But the woman my mother raised me to be vanished a long time ago, and the woman Aunt Theodora and Mr. Mansour and Mrs. Halloway helped me become is the one writing this now. I am not who they tried to make me. I am who the kind strangers helped me find, and every day I try to be a kind stranger to someone else.